What I'm about to tell you is a true story. Whether you choose to believe it or not, it's entirely up to you. At the tender age of 9 years, I was sent to the Duke of York's Royal Military School, a boarding school in Dover, Kent. A school for sons of servicemen who had died in action. It was a very strict, harsh school at times. But in retrospect, I look back at the experience with a certain amount of affection. So, how did I end up in a military school at the end of 9? Well, I and my sister had been moved from pillar to post during the course of the war and shortly after, starting off in Aldershot, then Brown Street in Bootle, a part of Liverpool, where I stayed with my lovely granny, Gertrude Laurie. My mum was called Annie Laurie, by the way. By the time I was 5 years old, I clearly remember the age, as I received my first toy, a fort with lead soldiers, and my first sweet peanut brittle. Tasted amazing. We were living in a 3-storied terrace with landings, which I presumed to be still in Liverpool, my granny having moved back to Edinburgh. Shortly thereafter, my sister and I were sent to live with my granny in Edinburgh, while my mother stayed and worked in England. My granny lived in a tenement in Dummydykes Road, Edinburgh, right opposite the Queen's Park, and I went to school in the Royal Mile. The school was Milton House School, now renamed Canongate Primary School, so it still exists, despite my having been there. My granny, who was old, and suffered from all the forms of rheumatism a person can suffer from, found looking after us, particularly on her meagre income from the parish, as she called it, a real burden. So she got in touch with my mother and told her that we would have to go and live with her, as she simply couldn't manage. My mother's response, she had recently remarried and had another child, was to send me to the Duke of York's Royal Military School and my sister to the Queen Victoria Royal Patriotic School for Girls. I always presumed her school was the female equivalent of the Duke of York's. As my father had been killed in action in Burma at the end of the Second World War, my mother entered me for the Duke of York's Royal Military School. Now, how she got me in is still a source of amazement to me, as I was less than gifted in the academic department. Anyway, she was successful, and I was consigned to spend my formative years at the school with almost no contact from my mother from then on. I feel I'm rambling a bit, so I'll get on with the crux of this story. As students in a military school, we were expected to be as good as, or better than, the regular army. We appeared at many parades in the area, and our marching and drill routines had to be seen to be believed. As such, we had to keep our uniforms and boots spotless and gleaming. It was not enough for us to be on a par with the regular army. Our officers expected us to be better at all things, and that included shooting. It may beg a belief, but as soon as I was physically able to lift a rifle to my shoulder, I was taught how to shoot a .303 rifle, the standard issue of the army at the time. The rifle had such a kick, our shoulders were constantly purple from the bruising. I received pocket money from the school of 6 shillings a month. That's 6 shillings or 72 pence in old money, the equivalent of 60 pence today. With that princely sum, I was expected to buy blanco, a whitener for the white parts of my uniform, black polish for my boots, brass or silver polish to shine my buttons and badges. Then there was toothpaste and soap, stamps and stationery to send letters home, which was mandatory, needles and thread for sewing, darning materials to darn my socks, and even with a list as long as that, I've probably forgotten other things that had to be purchased. Oh, and out of the 6 shillings or 72 pennies, we were also expected to save. As you can probably imagine, sweets were something of a rarity to me. Although I did sometimes get some from friends when they received their tucked boxes from home. I never did receive any. Despite all that, I did manage to keep 1 or 2 pennies, and I do mean 1 or 2, in order to spend it in Dover when I received my monthly pass. Once a month, on a Saturday, we received a 1-day pass, and we could do what we liked, within reason, on that day. A lot of the boys' parents used to arrive and whisk them away for the day. Boys like me, who did not receive visitors, were allowed to trudge down the hill, and that was a fair walk, I can tell you, into the town centre to do as we wished. Although we were still subject to military discipline, and woe betide anyone who did not uphold the honour and dignity of the school. The teachers, who were all army officers, did not have a lot of time for me, as I was less than academically gifted and was, in all honesty, a wee fat 4-eyed boy with no athletic prowess to compensate for my total lack of intellectual ability. Fact. I tried so hard at all the sports, rugby, cricket, athletics, and all the countless abilities that abounded in the school. I was a complete and utter failure at everything. I looked up to every other boy in the school with complete awe, wishing that I could be like them. They were like gods to me. Strangely enough, I did not envy the other boys. I was probably too thick to understand the concept of envy. In lessons, I was at the front of the class, the place for dummies, and the dunce's corner was a home from home. Despite all that, I did pay attention to everything that the teachers tried, in vain, to teach me. Mathematical symbols were just that to me, symbols. Things that meant something that I was totally unable to comprehend. They were just squiggles. If a teacher asked me a question, I had to get them to repeat it, as I had no idea what was being asked. When they did repeat it, I still had no idea, and was sometimes consigned to the dunce's corner. Unfortunately, unlike the cartoons, there was no dunce's hat. Or, alternatively, I had to try and avoid the piece of chalk that had been thrown and was winging its way towards me. Alas, I was always too slow to evade it. The English language, the written form that is, was just hieroglyphics. I honestly couldn't comprehend the link between the word and the sound. In the end, the teachers came to the conclusion that I was unteachable, if there is such a word, and just gave up on me. I can almost hear you stirring and thinking, surely not. That cannot be a description of the formative years of the person pounding away at the keyboard. Well, as I said at the start of this wee tale, it is a true story. And whether you choose to believe it or not is entirely up to you. So, back to my weekend passes from the school. If I did have a couple of pennies left over to spend, I used to buy pretty foreign postage stamps from Woolworths and would spend many happy hours with the others at the philately club at the school, swapping stamps and looking at the pretty ones the others had. Looking back, I was probably taken advantage of by the others because of my complete lack of comprehension of the values. However, I was happy. I was accepted, and I was treated as an equal. Then, when I was about 14 years old, I found a new delight in town. I have to confess here that my friends did not share my enthusiasm for the machine that I'd found in a penny arcade, and all it cost me was a halfpenny a go. My 2 pennies allowed me to go in the machine 4 times. Absolute heaven. A gambling machine, I hear you cry. Had Ken discovered gambling? No. In fact, I'd discovered an old Victorian electricity machine in the arcade. What happened was, you put your halfpenny into the machine, or halfpenny as they used to call it then gripped a brass handle on the left side of the machine. With your right hand, you gripped a brass knob that you turned to the right, and that allowed electricity to travel through your body from your right hand to your left one. Don't forget, going across the heart. A sort of regulated form of electrocution. The more you turned, the more electricity passed through your body. My muscles danced and contorted as they rippled out of control from the amount of electricity passing through them. You probably did similar experiments at school with dead frogs, connecting them to a battery and seeing their muscles twitching as though they were alive. My friends did not like the machine at all, as they found it very uncomfortable to use. They could only take a small amount of electricity before they leapt back from the machine, shaking their hands. My friends were absolutely amazed at how much electrical current I could endure, and every month I used to compete with myself to see how much more of the electrical torture I could tolerate. My friends watched in amazement, some even taking bets, in sweets of course, as to how high I could turn the switch. Of course, it was not torture to me. Here, I was the best. None of the others could compete with me. On this machine, Ken ruled. One day, some months after I discovered this machine, I was sitting in the classroom trying to understand what the teacher was saying and trying to comprehend the hieroglyphics he was scribbling. As usual, not comprehending anything. I remember this with complete clarity, as this was the turning point in my life, the defining moment, as poets and other literary figures might say. The teacher turned to me and asked me a question. whilst pointing to the blackboard. As usual, I had to ask him to repeat the question, and he did so, with resigned exasperation. Then, out of the blue, I received a jolt in my head, like a bolt of lightning. Of course, there was no lightning, and I was in the classroom. The whole thing had happened in my head. As the teacher repeated the question, he was jabbing the blackboard with a finger to accentuate his point. The miracle was, I understood everything he said, and I could read the blackboard perfectly. I understood the question, and more amazing, I knew the answer. So I gave it. Everything seemed to stand still for me at that point. The teacher's jaw dropping in amazement. The gasp of surprise that rose from my classmates. The teacher looked at me, unbelieving. He asked me the question again, and I repeated the answer. The strange thing was, not only did I understand the question and know the answer, I remembered everything I had ever been taught. It was as though all the learning that had been stored in a part of my brain that I had been unable to access until that moment. In that moment, my life changed completely and utterly. From being the bottom of the class at everything, I became top. That year in the exams, I had the second top mark in English in the entire school. Now, that is a true story, honestly. The only sort of explanation I can offer is the electrical machine that I was so fond of in Dover eventually jumped a gap in the wiring in my head, completing the circuit that wasn't working. It is the only explanation I can offer. So, I am eternally grateful to the inventor of that machine, and the only place you're likely to see one now is in a museum, as it would be deemed far too dangerous nowadays. Health and safety, you know.